Today, she's going to talk about a book which she was co-author with the late Wayne Farr, 9 Lives of a Black Panther, a story of survival. So, without further ado, Dr. Karin Stanford, who's going to kind of walk us through this amazing project. Karin?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Hunt. And I want to thank all of you for coming out today on, as Dr. Hunt said, on this gloomy day. This is a great opportunity for me to share the experiences of Wayne Farr, a member of the Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. He was a part of the LA branch of the party. And this presentation is really about Wayne Farr. I was a co-author, but it's his story. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about Wayne, his life, and interject some of his ideas from the book. So I'll read some passages so you can really get a feel for who he was. Wayne passed away a couple of months ago, and if not for that, he'd be standing here talking about his story. But since he's not here, I'm going to do it in his stead. So thank you for coming and allowing me to do that for Wayne. So let me begin by telling you a little bit about how I became involved in this project. I am a professor of African American politics, but I taught on probably the East Coast and the South for about 15 years. I taught at the University of Georgia and at North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And what I like to do is use local examples to sort of help students imagine the experiences that individuals had. So, and I didn't have a problem with that. In the South, there's certainly countless images of Martin Luther King Jr. and, you know, his battles with some of the racist sheriffs like Bull Connor. There's, you know, images of the Montgomery bus boycott. There's Ralph Abernathy. There's Rosa Parks. Just a bunch of images. And then I moved back home to Los Angeles. And I'm in the classroom, and I can't find any images. A few online, but no comprehensive books about black activism. And I teach African American politics, but I also teach social movements. So I thought, my gosh, I gotta go find these images, right? In the meantime, a really good friend of mine invited me to a breakfast. It's a monthly breakfast held in South Central, organized by Roland Freeman, another member of the Black Panther Party. And so they'd have these monthly breakfasts where everyone could come together who were involved in the party, but also in local activism, and kind of talk about events of the day. Sort of, it gives them an opportunity, or gave them an opportunity, to reconnect. And so I went to the breakfast, and going to the breakfast monthly sort of morphed into a conversation with Wayne about writing his story. I was surprised that there wasn't one primary book on the Black Panther Party in LA, considering the major battles and the way that they transformed the national party. So I was really shocked. I had read Elaine Brown's book, of course, and she spends a lot of time in Los Angeles, but then she goes up to Oakland. I had read Flores' Forbes book, Will You Die With Me, who comes from San Diego, and then he goes up to Oakland. But I hadn't really seen a picture of LA. So Wayne and I said, well, let's do it. So that's where this book comes from. Now, Wayne and I, we debated about whether or not he should write sort of a third-person analysis or if he should write an autobiography. And he decided that he would write an autobiography because he wanted to take a stand. He wanted to argue for the relevance of his experience. He wanted people to learn a lesson about his experience. So we chose autobiography, which was interesting for me because I'd never done one before, but I think it turned out okay. So the book 9 Lives of a Black Panther tells the story of Wayne's experiences as a son, a father, an activist, an entrepreneur, and a survivor of the SWAT attack against the Southern California chapter on December 8th, 1969. Now, what I'm going to try to do is work this. This is going to be interesting. Let's see what happens. Something like that. Okay, there he is. There's Wayne. So Wayne, we talked a lot about his experience and why he joined the party. And what I uncovered, and I guess what Wayne and I decided, was that his family experiences were very traditional. They were very ordinary experiences. Here he is at the age of 5 in front of a Christmas tree. He's born in Berkeley, California in 1950. Just like millions of other black families, his family comes from the South, Louisiana, a place called Bunkie, Louisiana. They came to California to escape over racism, for better educational opportunities, for better employment opportunities. Of course, this is post-World War II. And of course, there's defense industries are burgeoning in California. His father was able to get a job on the shipyards in Oakland. I'm going to say Oakland. His mother comes out and she becomes a domestic. That's his Aunt Nanny. He was very, very close to his Aunt Nanny, and she's the one who says to his mother, you need to come to California. She's a domestic. She's known to be a great cook. She's able to hook all her family members up with jobs. Now, Wayne's mother is really the key to his story. She's a domestic, but she's going to high school. She becomes a valedictorian of her class. But the day after she receives her diploma and that great award, she goes right back to being a domestic, right? She's a very intelligent woman. She and Wayne's father eventually divorce, and they move to Los Angeles. Why? Their family ties in Los Angeles too. Now this is very similar to my own family. My family comes out of Mississippi. But when my family made that great trek across the country, half went to Oakland and San Francisco, and the other half went to LA, right? So we come from LA. So Wayne's mother has all these family members in LA. And she wants a job at the post office, because back then getting a job at the post office was like the job to have. You had some stability. So she wants a job at the post office. But she also has some family members who are dabbling in real estate. And she decides that's how she's going to gain wealth. And she does. So Wayne's mother buys this wonderful house. I think it was a lot with 3 homes on it on the west side of Los Angeles. Now, when they first came, they were living in, I guess, close to Watts, not really Watts, off of Avalon in Manchester. She moves all the way to the west side, which is 107th and Normandy. Now we might consider that not the west side, but back then it was the west side. And so Wayne is now doing what? He's integrating an all-white neighborhood. So, let me see if I can find that integration. If I can find this, I don't know what I did. Anyway, so Wayne is integrating this all-white neighborhood. And let me tell you what Wayne says about that. Let me see if I can find his statements on integration. And this is how he felt about being a kid, integrating this neighborhood, and then going to Henry Clay, which was predominantly white at that time. He says, as national leaders and the adults in my family touted the benefits of integration, moving on up only made my daily life difficult. While I was trailblazing for my generation into the outward expression of upward mobility, I was in conflict with white kids almost every day. On my first day at Henry Clay, this white boy came up to me and stared and said, "Ain't your mama on the pancake box?" "What?" I asked, stunned. "You heard me," he snickered. We were standing at the top of the stairs when he said it. Without even thinking about it, I helped him lose his balance. I shoved him and he really took a bad fall. The kid's grapevine carried the news all over the school, and everybody heard what had happened and knew there would be a showdown to exact revenge. I was scared, but I knew I had to stand my ground. So, now Wayne wasn't a big guy, but he's ready to fight. And so the question that I asked Wayne was, why didn't you go cower in a corner, go tell the teacher you were being picked on? Why did you throw the guy down the stairs? Why was that your response, right? He had a decision to make. And he said, well, I was going to fight back. And I was like, well, why? And so he said certainly his physical safety was being threatened, but also historical memory. And here Wayne had 2 perspectives. He says, you know what? I could have ended up like Emmett Till as a corpse, or I could have won like my grandpa Felix, who fought back. So let me tell you what he says about Emmett Till and his grandpa Felix. And he spent some time in the South with his grandmother during the summers. And this is what he says. He says, the time I spent in the South, coupled with the images of Emmett Till's mutilated corpse, instilled in me a peculiar fear. The idea that a black man could have his fingers cut off, get castrated, or be burned at the stake haunted me. I could really feel it, and I knew we wouldn't get any mercy. That feeling stayed with me. So being confronted by white boys at school meant that I had to fight for my life. I needed to make these white boys understand that I was not to be messed with. So I had to establish my reputation. So he said he fought almost every day. And then eventually, after he established his reputation, people stopped messing with him. This is what he says about his grandpa Felix. If I can find it, and if I can, let me tell you about his grandpa Felix. As he says, his grandpa Felix was known as a bad nigga at that time. And he says that his mother said it could be because he was half white or half crazy. And that's his grandpa Felix. So, he says, tales about Felix have been passed down through the generations in our family. So that's that historical memory. He has this memory of Emmett Till, but then he also has this memory of Grandpa Felix. He says, being too much like Felix was the reason our Uncle Edwin had to leave the South when he was young. I'm not sure what my Uncle Edwin did, but Felix had to rescue him from a local white man who wanted to beat him. When the white man came to the house, Felix told the family, I ain't letting them white folks take Edwin. So when the white man came, Felix pulled him off his horse, pulled out his gun, of course, and after that, he put Uncle Edwin on a train and sent him to live with Aunt Debbie in Oakland. So Uncle Felix fought back. And then when Uncle Edwin got to Oakland, he fought back too. That's a whole other story. You can read that in the book. Uncle Edwin was a character because all of them wanted to be like Grandpa Felix. So Wayne said, okay, I had to make a choice, and that's the choice I made. I made a choice that I was going to fight back. Now, when Wayne fights back, you know, we can't ignore the fact that there was a national political context that made it easier to challenge the system. There were so many people challenging the system in various ways at that time. So we know there was a mass movement for civil rights occurring. There was also strategies for black liberation and self-determination. People were trying to choose between nonviolence versus self-defense. We know that there was a war in Vietnam and anti-war demonstrations were beginning to occur, and black students were organizing. So that's the national political context in which Wayne chose to fight back, and so of course he got some support for that. And then there was a local political context as well. We know there were highly publicized cases of police brutality and police abuse, which of course led to the Watts Rebellion in 1965. Ron Wilkins, a local member of SNCC, helped to found an organization called the Community Alert Patrol, and this was the organization that began monitoring the police. And actually the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in Oakland, they learned about CAP and they took their strategy from CAP. And so this is a real LA story, right? And so he knows about CAP, and he also knows about an organization called the Black Congress. And this is a very interesting organization. I'm looking for any information and data on the Black Congress. Not only was it an organization, but it was also a building. And that's where all the civil rights and black power organizations would gather monthly to talk about what was happening in the community. And this is where Wayne would go. He'd go by their offices and pick up some literature periodically, because that's what was happening. It was an atmosphere of activism occurring at that time. So he knew about the Black Congress. Eventually he picks up some information about the Black Panther Party. Bunchy begins I shouldn't say Bunchy because there was a Black Panther political party. It's a long story, but anyway, the party that we know of today was started by Bunchy Carter. And I think, so Wayne learns about Bunchy, he knows about Bunchy's work, and he starts to interact a little with the party, with some SNCC members. He makes a decision that he's going to join the party. Let's pray on this. Okay, so there you go. And so we all know the history of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, established in October 1966 by Huey Newton, Bobby Seale. Of course, they were both students at Marion College. And they established it with a 10-point platform. They were interested in challenging police brutality, something Wayne was very interested in. He was very interested in self-determination, in unbiased education, decent housing, employment, a fair criminal justice system. And so Wayne says, well, you know what, I can get down with that. Like that ideology, love the fact that they stand for self-defense, considering the experiences that he had, so he joins the party. And then, of course, we know the Black Panther Party had community service programs, which programs that Wayne truly, truly supported. This is the free food giveaway program, where they would get groceries from stores, of course, and give them to the community. The free breakfast program in the middle, and then you see an image of the free health care program. So Wayne was thoroughly engaged in those programs when he was a member of the party. But we know that being a member of the Black Panther Party is not without its consequences, right? So what happens? He decides that he's going to become a member of the Watts cadre of the party. So there are about 5 offices at that time. Did you guys know that? There were 5 offices? Most people think that there's just one office. No, they have 5 offices at that time period, right? So there's one in Watts. And Wayne says, you know what, I don't want to be down there at central headquarters because there's too many intrigue going on down there, major politics down there. I really want to do the work of the people. So he is a member of the Watts office. He works security detail. Why? He's interested in self-defense based upon his own experiences. He's had a lot of experience with guns, uncles from the South, showing him how to work guns. He got his first gun when he was 12. He used to take guns, and he did it while I was interviewing him. Took a gun out, and he took it apart, and he put it back together so I could see. That was interesting. Anyway, I was like, oh my God, my daughter was in the room too, and she was like, oh, what's happening? So anyway, so he's really interested, he's involved in the community. He talks about in the book helping to mediate disputes between husbands and wives, and making sure that domestic violence doesn't continue to occur in families. He's visiting the projects, he's proselytizing, he's engaged in political education. Now, all the while he's a member of the party, he's also the president of the Black Student Union at Harvard College. So he is truly an activist. But then, of course, he and members of the party suffer political repression, and they receive constant beatings from the LAPD, and they're harassed all the time. One of the things that he and Roland like to say was that, you know, we used to get up in the morning and then shake our tail. Because they said that every member of the party had a police officer assigned to them. By then, the police department was growing, and there was something called Metro Squad. First, there was just the LAPD, and then there was Metro Squad, and they were assigned to the campus. So let me tell you what Wayne says about the harassment and the beatings. And in this case, Wayne says my name was ringing in the streets. So at first, of course, the police, they were focused on the leadership. People like Bunchy Carter, John Huggins, Long John Washington, Roland Freeman, Ronald Freeman, people like that. But then he said his name starts ringing in the streets because he's such an effective organizer. And so the police say, you know what, we're going to have to find a way to stop him. We're going to let him know that his actions will not be without consequences. So he says one day they're driving down the street and they get stopped by the police. And when he steps out, they tell the police they step out of the car. He says he steps out of the car and they swarm him. And this is what he says. He says, after they swarmed me, one cop named Fisher put me in a chokehold. Now he has no idea that this is about to happen to him. They just grab him by the neck. I had on a pair of army boots which delivered enough power that I was able to kick one of the cops off. But Fisher still had me in a chokehold and was really trying to take me out. I felt like I might pass out, but desperate for air, I found the strength to reach back, grab his ears, and yank hard, which made him let me go. He let go at the last second, and I sucked in a deep breath. 2 cops were still on me, each one holding one of my legs. Fisher went at it again, trying to choke me out. These pigs were working me over pretty good. And while all this was going on, I could briefly see Teray, this is Walter Teray Pope, another member of the party, turned around as if he was coming to my aid. But one of the pigs stuck a shotgun in his mouth and shouted at him, turn around and get back on the fence. There wasn't a thing he could do. So they put Wayne in the car and they drive him around for 3 or 4 hours, which they were known to do, and they beat him for 3 or 4 hours. They beat him with a flashlight, they beat him with their billy clubs, and then they drop him off in front of the hospital. That was something else they were known to do. They beat him up, and then they take him to the hospital. And then somebody at the hospital who knew their family members would call the family and say, come get him, right? After that, Wayne goes and hides in the trash can for 2 days trying to, get the police, et cetera, et cetera. Now, so Wayne has that one experience, but remember, a lot of them are having this experience. And now, in addition to harassment and beatings, of course, the FBI, as many of you know, had a counterintelligence program. And the purpose of their program with regard to the black community was to destroy black nationalist organizations and certainly to destroy the Black Panther Party for self-defense, which is one of the reasons why so many people died. I don't know if any of you are aware, most people think it was Chicago, but the LA Black Panther Party lost more members than any other chapter in the country, right? And it was either to internal factions, certainly FBI's counterintelligence program, fights with other organizations, like in this case, and then just shootings by the police. So we all know what happened here at UCLA, and actually, I have a letter related to the murder, related to the conflict between the US organization and the Black Panther Party, in which the LAPD is working with the FBI on creating conflict between the organizations. And so if you can read this, it says the Los Angeles office is currently preparing an anonymous letter for bureau approval, which will be sent to the Los Angeles Black Panther Party, supposedly from a member of the US organization, which it will be stated that the group of the US organization is aware of the Black Panther Party contract to kill Ron Karin, leader of US. And they, US members in retaliation, have made plans to ambush leaders of the Black Panther Party in Los Angeles. So this was a real threat, and this led to murders. As we see, Bunchy Carter, John Huggins, killed here, Campbell Hall, on campus. And so we don't have to really talk about this unless you guys want to, because there's a whole lot of conversation about these murders, but we do know that the FBI's counterintelligence program was involved with sowing seeds of destruction. Captain Franco, anybody heard of Captain Franco? Captain Franco was an early member of the party. He was an older guy, and he always talked about killing white people. That was his mantra, is how many white people can I kill today? So Wayne kind of thought he was crazy, because the Black Panther Party was a non-racist organization. For them, it wasn't about black, white, and color wasn't the issue. It was really the economic system, system of oppression. That was the enemy. It wasn't about race. But Captain Franco liked to talk about race. So what Metro did in Captain Franco's case was they had arrested him for armed robbery. And I don't know whether or not he did it, but they arrested him nonetheless for armed robbery. Geronimo, who was the leader at this time because Bunchy Carter is dead and John Huggins is dead, Geronimo says, well, we got to watch out for Franco. But what happens? He gets released within a day for armed robbery. That doesn't make sense to people. Now, why would they release him for armed robbery? Especially given his history, his background, his record. So then they begin to suspect that Franco had turned state's evidence against him. So Captain Franco is released and 2 other members are arrested. So that created more suspicion. And then Captain Franco ends up dead, found in an alley in Long Beach. Who do we think killed Captain Franco? I won't say, but I will say in terms of sowing the seeds of destruction, coming up with all kinds of ways to create conflict within the party. That was one of the reasons why LA lost so many members. So, what was the response to repression? The beatings, FBI's counterintelligence program, the daily harassment. Well, certainly, the rank and file members of the party were told to do what? Report any problems to the field secretaries and to your captain, or to the Minister of Defense at that time, who was Geronimo. And they did. And they continued to. And they continued to. But after a while, they said, you know what? Our leaders aren't effective. They cannot stop us from being harassed and beaten. So we've got to do something about it. Now remember, these are people who really believe in self-defense. So they went on the offensive. Now, I'm not sure. I think in New York, you know, we have examples of that. The LA Panthers went on the offensive. They begin to gather resources, and Wayne talks about the ways in which they got resources, maybe going to a military base or two, and either purchasing weapons or, how can I say this, I don't want to say gently asking people for weapons, but taking some weapons from military personnel. So they amassed a lot of weapons. And if any of you have seen the cover of the book, you'll see some of the weapons that was taken out of Central Headquarters the night of the shooting. Wayne had the idea that they should really use the sewer system. And this was his idea. And the sewers were for offensive and defensive purposes. They could hide in the sewers if they were being attacked, or they could use the sewers to attack. So they used to go down and investigate the sewers. In the first chapter of the book, he talks about how they investigated the sewers. Geronimo went down a few times with Wayne. Masai went down with Wayne. Several other members of the party did. They were trying to map out the sewer system, and even Wayne tells me that Ronald Freeman actually went and got a map of the sewer system from the library. It was really important to them, right? They also began to fortify their offices. Geronimo, and this is according to Wayne, had an informant inside the police department, and this informant would let them know what was going on, so they knew an attack could come. So about 3 months before the major attack, they had already begun to dig a tunnel to the sewers from their office. I can go on and on and on. We don't have time for questions. This is the problem. Let me see if I can move forward. Okay, so a few days before the December 8th attack, in Chicago, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark are murdered. I think it around 5 in the morning, 4 or 5 in the morning. Around the same time as the attack in Los Angeles. So they're murdered. He's murdered in his sleep, and Mark is on guard duty, and he's shot and killed as well. Then the attack on LA comes. Now, what's interesting, you know what, my tunnel isn't in there. And what I wanted to say was with regard to the tunnel that they built, the plan was, and this is according to Wayne, the plan was to build a tunnel from the 41st and Central, from the headquarters to the sewers. Now, if you're building a tunnel down to the sewer system, what do you think your plans are? Anybody got an idea? What were their plans? Well, they figured the police would just run into the building, and then they would all run down into the tunnel and blow it up. That's how serious they were about saving their lives and stopping the police from killing them. So, they fortify the building. As they're digging, they're putting dirt all around the doors, and they're fortifying the walls. Remember, a lot of these guys came out of the military, so it makes sense they knew exactly what to do. Now, the attack on Los Angeles that occurred 5 a.m., 5-hour shootout occurs between 13 members of the Black Panther Party and about 300 members of SWAT, right? And none of the Black Panther Party members died. How amazing is that? 5 hours of shooting, even after they blew the roof off of the building, which they eventually did, and that's one of the reasons why Wayne and his comrades eventually gave up, right? 13 members at the headquarters. But that wasn't the only building in LA that was attacked that morning. Most people believe it was just that, just the headquarters. No, 2 other Panther locations were attacked. The home of Geronimo and Sandra Pratt were attacked. Long John was in that house. They came in with guns blazing, and Geronimo talks about Sandra Pratt jumping on top of him to save him from the police. She was willing to take a bullet for him, and Geronimo was very proud of that, reporting away. Long John Washington, he's the only one who's arrested, but then he's let go because he was in another room at the time. Another center, this is the Walter Teray Pope Center. Walter Teray was killed by the police, member of the party that I mentioned earlier. There were 3 of them at this place, at this home, and they actually, their home was raided as well. And what I heard from Elaine Brown personally, and Wayne, was that Alamar took to the roof and started shooting. Thank God he didn't get shot. And I think Alamar just died about a year or 2 ago. So anyway, 3 places were attacked that day. And again, all of them survived. They were busted, of course. All went to jail, except for Long John. Trial lasted about 7 months. There were 72 counts against them. The counts range from conspiracy to commit murder of police officers, to assault with a deadly weapon, to possession of illegal weapons. The verdicts, none of them were found guilty of the conspiracy to commit murder. A few of them were convicted on the conspiracy to possess illegal weapons. Wayne did about 6 months, and they considered that a victory. Significance for me and for Wayne, in terms of writing this book, certainly it was to fill a void in the history on activism in Los Angeles. It documents one of the early attempts and most violent attempts by SWAT to squash political activism. This book also honors those who fought against political oppression. And certainly, and this is what was really important to Wayne in terms of not being found not guilty, was that it validated the right to self-defense. And now I'm open. Any questions, comments, concerns? What do you think? Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. I grew up in Berkeley in the 60s. I'm not quite as old as Far, but some of this resonates with my my early experiences when Reagan tear gassed King Junior High. My question is this. We're sitting now in a situation where Ferguson, Missouri is just the tip of an iceberg, where we're watching history repeat itself. Self-defense, right? And why is this message not resonating in terms of the legacy of the Black Panther Party?
You know, it's so interesting. One of the terms I used earlier was historical memory. And I think it's just because people don't know those stories. It's not like the history of the Black Panther Party is being taught in schools. And so it's almost like we're reinventing the wheel, isn't it? And those on the ground are trying to figure out what to do. And we've got all these lessons learned from the 60s. This heavy militarization of the police. SWAT was founded during that time period. And so we've got to find a way to educate those who are on the ground. Now, Wayne actually commented on Ferguson before he passed away. And it's on the website, the 9 Lives of the Black Panther website, and he says something like, are we citizens or not? If we are citizens, then the police must stand down, like they did with SDS in the 60s. He says, and if they don't stand down, then we need to assert our right to self-defense. So it's all about teaching young people, oh, my brother, the history of the party and the Black Power movement. Any other questions? Observations?
I have a question. One of your slides earlier mentioned the spook hunters. You didn't talk about that. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the linkages between street clubs and kind of protecting communities, the rise of street gangs, and the relationship between those local leaders and the Black Panther Party in LA. And of course what happens after the Black Panther Party starts to, well, is really dismantled.
You know, it's interesting because and this is talking to Wayne, Roland, Ronald, Long John, and trying to understand where the party members came from in LA. And most of them came out of street gangs. Certainly some came out of the educational system, and that's something that a lot of people don't know, is that these guys were students. Oftentimes they were students, and of course some had come out of the youth authority. the Slawsons, which was the gang that Bunchy Carter was affiliated with. Many members of the party came from that gang. The Bartenders. Some of the parties came from a gang known as the Bartenders. Party members came from a gang known as the Bartenders. And Greg might be able to help with that. Roland and Ronald came out of the Bartenders, right? As where the Gladiators, the US organization, many members came from. The Gladiators. So those I think that, what's her name? Sandra Pratt comes from a gang called the Rebel Rousers. So there are all these gangs, and they all know each other, but based upon where they live, determine how they would affiliate themselves. Now, so they become many of these gangs become political. And then when the movement ends, what happens? The politics are no longer there, and so they begin to turn on each other. Now, one of the things that who is that? I think it's, Wayne, Roland, and several of them said, you know what? We have to take responsibility for putting guns in the hands of some of these young people. Because they used to take them out to the range and show them how to shoot. Because they were still promoting self-defense. But it was just a very different time, a very different environment and atmosphere. And unfortunately, these young kids didn't have the same kind of political education classes. They didn't have the same knowledge base. They weren't getting the same kind of education that the Panthers were. So they eventually turned on each other. Would you have something else to add to that?
Well, no, I mean, I think that was the point. I mean, I just thought it was an interesting, the slide, I mean, it was a very interesting part of your discussion. And I saw the Spook Hunters mentioned, I thought you were going to go into that, but then you didn't, so I wanted you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the Spook Hunters were a gang, but it was a white gang.
Right.
And they were hunting spooks.
Mm-hmm.
They were committed to segregation, and so when black kids came to their schools, then they would basically try to run the black kids away.
So I guess the point I wanted you to kind of talk more about was this kind of relationship between, I guess, the threats that blacks were facing, particularly as they were moving into white space, and kind of the emergence of street clubs and gangs as kind of protecting the community, and then kind of what happens when things fall apart.
Right. Anything else? Someone? Scott Brown, say something. What about, Scott is the author of Fighting for Us. He wrote a book on the US organization, which we talked about in terms of the murders at Campbell Hall and Bunchy and John Huggins. And I said a little bit about the FBI's role in that, but I didn't elaborate too much because you need kind of problems when you have that dialogue in LA. That's a difficult dialogue to have.
So my background, I'm in education, and I'm really interested in how we integrate these historical lessons in our K-12 classroom. And I'm also from the South, so this is my first foray into the West, and I'm just wondering how is this message about the Black Panthers received? Because they're seen completely different in the South, and when we hear Black Panther, we're like, oh my gosh, they're militants.
Right.
Clearly we don't understand.
Right.
And so how is it what is the message like here in California? And is it taught in schools or in what capacity? Because it is part of California history, largely. So.
I don't know whether or not it's taught in secondary schools. My assumption is that it's not. I think people still see the Black Panther Party as a very scary organization, an organization that targeted the police, an organization that we shouldn't be affiliated with. My mother couldn't understand why I was studying the Black Panther Party. So I don't think it's taught in secondary schools. I don't even think it's taught at most universities. I mean, I teach it because I teach social movements in African American politics. And for me, African American politics is just not about electoral politics. It's not just about voting. It's about interest group activity. It's about unconventional activity as well. So I don't know what else is happening. I do know that one of my critiques since I've come back to California, because I'm from here originally, and when I came back, I said, where are the books? Where are the textbooks on social and political activism in LA? I know that, you did one, an edited volume very recently though. So 15 years ago, there was very little information out there. And I'm still waiting for the books on the Black Congress. I'm still waiting for the books on the civil rights movement in Los Angeles. And I've seen some interesting books about, I think there's one called Third World Left, and I think there's a couple of other books that talks about integrated politics, but for the most part, there's very, very little on Black Los Angeles and political activism, and I think that's the charge for scholars today, is that we've got to do that work.
I just want to say, I think that all the work that's been going on in terms of documenting the story of the Black Panther Party, the different memoirs, have definitely had a major impact in terms of sort of asserting a new kind of dialogue. And I just want to share that in 2015, I think there's going to be a major PBS documentary done by filmmaker Stanley Nelson, who has done a number of PBS docs on Emmett Till and others. And it's the first time I've seen the kind of in-depth footage and commentary from a lot of participants. I believe that, Greg will let me know if this is correct, Wayne and Freeman brothers, were they able to actually participate in the documentary?
Right.
They were interviewed.
They were interviewed?
Cut, but they were
Okay, they were interviewed for it. So I think that there's a way that the work you've done and the work that a lot of other historians and filmmakers like Greg Everett, they've really shifted the paradigm and kind of forced a discussion that, I think many have been reluctant to have.
And so now, in terms of where we are today with Ferguson and all of these, and again, the militarization of local police forces, the shooting of the 12-year-old kid. I mean, again, we're not, and I don't know if we'll see a response, if we'll see an organized response like the Black Panther Party presented to us. I'm not sure we'll see it because, again, I really don't believe that that knowledge is filtered down. And maybe after the documentary is presented, which I'm assuming will be at the 50th anniversary, which would be, what, 2016? Maybe then there'll be some dialogue on a mass level, but I guess I'm just not optimistic about it.
Right.
Does the book go into anything about the Black Liberation Army, or?
Yes, it does. Wayne dabbled in and out of work with the Black Liberation Army. Geronimo Pratt had become involved with the underground movement for a while, and Wayne took a break from LA. He had to leave LA for a while, and so he was asked by Geronimo to do some of the work of the BLA, and he did. There is some discussion about Eldridge Cleaver's support for the BLA and Huey Newton's lack of support, which led to a major cleavage between Huey Newton in Oakland and the Southern California chapter. So there's some discussion about that, but we don't spend a lot of time on the Black Liberation Army, except that, and even when Wayne talked about his work with the Black Liberation Army, he was a little hesitant. He was hesitant about saying exactly what he did. Actually, he was hesitant about a lot. And that's why it took about a good year and a half to just pull the information out of him. And what I found interesting, and Greg can attest to that because you interviewed them all, but even though they'll say, listen, I really want to do this book, I know it's important for me to do this book, we have to leave a legacy, we have to leave the history. Man, when you sit them in that chair and you start asking those questions, and they either, I don't know, would you say, Greg, would they, how can I say this? I don't think it was fear. Maybe it was more not wanting to get anyone else in trouble.
Yeah, we're
What'd you
talking about
say?
cases that are still open.
Cases that are still open?
Yeah, like the
Okay.
murders here. And the police will not cooperate with me, give me a copy of the police report, and they claim because it's an open case.
Right, but there's so few left, I think that we can finally begin to tell those stories, and I think that those who are left are gonna have to open up about some of that. I mean, after Franco's murder,
Well, I do have a lot of it on video.
the Franco murder,
Yeah, they did open up to me a lot on video, and I just, I didn't use it in part one, but as you and I move forward and DJ and hopefully the university gets behind us, we'll be able to uncover some of that hidden stuff that you weren't able to get.
because some of it is some difficult truths. real difficult truths.